Good morning, everybody. I'm Tim O'Farrell, and I am the Executive Director of NAIOP Maryland. Welcome to Capital Stack 2020. Backed by popular demand this morning is our guest speaker, Spencer Levy, of the America's Head of Research and Senior Economic Advisor for CBRE. He will be giving us an overview of the impact of COVID-19 has had on the number of angles on the real estate market, as well as giving his credible insights for 2021 in the Mid-Atlantic region. Spencer has invited a solid lineup of guest speakers, so we are in for a real treat this morning. But before we kick things off, I'd like to share a few housekeeping items with everyone to help maximize your experience today, especially in spite of this virtual climate. First, as you probably know, today's program is approved for 2 Maryland Real Estate Continuing Education CE hours. To earn those hours, your camera must be on 100% of the time with you on screen. We've been asked to hold you accountable for your full participation by monitoring any absences from the screen, not counting bathroom breaks or temporary incidentals such as homeschool interruptions and other things. But we do have to monitor attendance. Second, another requirement for CE credits is for us to record this full 2 hours. So we'll be recording the entire time. Third, we ask that you keep your microphone on mute during the entire presentation. To minimize any unexpected incidentals in your environment. So when that child comes in and says, I need help for homework, we don't want to hear about it. So thank you. Next, because it's a very large group this morning, we're going to ask that you send your questions via the chat feature. You should see that feature on the borders of your screen. Spencer and I will be monitoring those, and we'll address them as we're able to throughout the presentation. We have earmarked the end of the presentation for a Q&A session too, so most of them will be dealt with at that time. I know that many of you are Zoom experts over these past several months, but we want to review a couple options for today's program. In the upper hand of your screen is the option to choose gallery view or speaker view. We suggest speaker view during each presentation. You can switch back to gallery for the Q&A, but to get the maximum impact, we recommend you put your view to speaker view for this. Feel free again to use that chat feature at the bottom, but remember everyone can see the chat unless you designate who you're sending it to. We ask that you send to everyone when you're asking questions so that we can monitor your questions. Okay, so now that we have all that housekeeping out of the way, let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, someone who most of you know. Spencer Levy, America's Head of Research and Senior Economic Advisor for CBRE. With him, he has a couple special guests this morning, including NAIOP Maryland President Jim Lighthizer of Chesapeake Real Estate Group, and a pre-recorded interview with Stephen Bedorick, President and CEO of Corporate Office Properties Trust. Now I kick it off to you, Spencer, and your team.
Well, thank you, Tim. And wow, what an honor. It was this 10 years in a row, Tim. Can't get anybody else. I'm just kidding. I'm delighted to be doing this event because I look around this room here. I see so many friends of mine, and I'm lucky to have so many friends in the Baltimore region. And if you're not a friend of mine today, hopefully you will be after today's presentation. And what today's presentation is about is what's going on in the world, big picture, and we're going to bring it down to what's going on here in Baltimore. And to assist me in today's presentation, I'm going to have a series of speakers that are both local leaders from COPT and Jim Lighthizer, along with several of my colleagues. Ask as many questions as you possibly can, and we will read them in the chat room, and I will answer them real time if we can. So let's begin. I'm going to lead us off, and then we're going to go into a series of speakers where I'm then going to be the MC and ask them questions. Where are we? Well, believe it or not, we're in a somewhat better place than you feel in your guts. What do I mean by that? Because we've been analyzing the economy, real estate, secular trends for decades, but obviously with a fine-tooth comb since March. And our outlook for the economy from a macro perspective has been largely correct, that we believe that the economy would come back relatively quickly and we would see the ability to have a strong end to 2021. 2021 will be better. Jobs will be better than people expected. The stock market will be better than people expected. And all these things happened. But you don't feel that in your guts. And I know you don't, because I don't feel it in my gut either. And the reason why you don't feel it in your guts, because you've all been cooped up in your houses for 9 months. and it changes the way you think. And it's important that we start there because there is a distinction between how you think and how you feel in everything that you do from a business capacity. But now it's even more important today because some people are making some very big decisions based upon what's in their guts. And that starts with the work from home phenomenon. CBRE has been the leader in terms of surveys, econometric analysis, in analyzing the work from home phenomenon. What do the surveys say? What do the CEOs say when they're on national television saying? They're calling into question the future of the O in NAIOP. I'm not. And the reason why I'm not is two reasons. Number one, we've been studying the office for as long as I've been in this business. And for as long as I've been in this business, people haven't gone to the office because they needed to. They go to the office because they want to, because it makes them better, because it makes them more productive, because it allows them to attract and retain talent, to have the culture in the company that they want. Folks, let me just cut to the chase here. The future of the office is bright. And those people who say otherwise are probably thinking with their guts, not their heads, in part because we are in what an early 1980s song from a great band called Asia was called the heat of the moment. Who remembers that song? Come on, folks. Most of you are around my vintage. Of course you remember that song. You know what that song was about? It was about in the heat of the moment, you made bad decisions. Now, I'm not suggesting that the people who filled out these surveys or the people that are speaking on Squawk Box and other television shows are not telling the truth. They are telling the truth as they see it. But mark my words, once we are through this storm, once there is light at the end of the tunnel, those surveys will shift. Those CEOs will shift. And they will shift to a place where the future of office is bright. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But let's stay macro for a moment. And let's talk about the election. The election is over. Sorta. But it's over. We have called it for Joe Biden. The one thing that is not called is the Senate race in Georgia. And I will tell you that shortly after this call, I have a call with the Real Estate Roundtable. And I asked him point blank, well, what will happen if the Georgia election goes Democratic, so the Democrats take control of the Senate? His point of view, and the Real Estate Roundtable, for those people who don't know it, may be one of the top real estate lobbying organizations in the world. He said not much. He said that the worst impulses of the left would be put in check by a 50-50 Senate, just like the worst impulses of the right are put into check by a Democratic House. The bottom line is this, is that the outcome of the election from a business perspective, again, I'm not talking from a social perspective. We can get into social issues if you want to. But from a business perspective, it was about as good of an outcome as we could have hoped for. And why is that? Because split government is good for business. Because what you want is a moderate environment where you have reasonable certainty on taxes and regulations. And that is what you're going to get in the next 2 years, even if the Georgia race goes to the Democrats. Listen, I'm not throwing stones at the Democrats. I'm not throwing stones at Biden. I do throw stones at extremism on the right and the left, because that is not good for business either way. But in a moderate environment, we should be just fine. Now, a lot of those things that you guys are thinking about from a political perspective are also going to be just fine. Those things include the preservation of the 1031 exchange, which Joe Biden had in his campaign pouch of things that he was going to get rid of. Let me tell you something, folks. The 1031 exchange has been around since 1926. It's not going anywhere. He wouldn't raise that much money for that anyways. What's also not going to be coming anytime soon is the preservation of the SALT tax. That is probably even more important to Maryland than would be the 1031 exchange, because the SALT tax, better known as your ability to deduct more than $10,000 of state and local taxes from your income taxes, is a big problem. It's a big problem for states, unfortunately, Maryland being one of them, that are higher taxed than others. New York has the same problem, Connecticut, California, and it causes some people to make decisions to leave. That's not coming back, certainly not for the next 2 years, because the next 2 years, Congress is going to be in a bunker mentality, doing everything it can to stimulate the economy, not to lower taxes. Now, some of the other things that people are worried about from a commercial real estate perspective include, will they change the treatment of the carried interest tax? Also unlikely. And changing the treatment of it from capital gains to ordinary income, unlikely to happen, even though it's going to be in the crosshairs of the Biden administration. The bottom line is this: I'm going to finish where I started. We're in a good place from a business perspective because of the outcome of the 2020 election. Now, what's our outlook for next year? Got a whole lot better in the last 2 weeks, didn't it? The vaccine announcement gave us light at the end of the tunnel. Now, I don't want to hide the ball here, folks. This is a dark tunnel, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. I just canceled my trip to go to Florida for January. I said, there's no way in God's green earth I'm doing that trip with the numbers of the way they are. The bottom line is I'm not alone. And we're going to be in a very dark place for the next month or two as the disease is rearing its ugly head again. My kids who were going to school, not anymore. They are going to be canceling their schools as well. So it's a pretty dark place. But the good news from an economic perspective is the vaccine changed our outlook for the future, which is why the stock market spiked in the last 2 weeks, particularly in the REIT world. Now, folks, even though I get the opportunity and the honor to speak to you guys every year, I am not Nostradamus, but I did get one prediction right. I did say, as of 2 weeks ago, that the REITs are tremendously oversold, particularly CBD locations like New York, San Francisco, and elsewhere. And lo and behold, doggone it, they popped by 35% last Monday, and they went up again yesterday. Why? Goes right back to my song from the band Asia. And by the way, every speaker today is required to have at least one pop culture reference, or you're not speaking with me again. It goes back to that heat of the moment thing. People are making extreme decisions at the wrong time. And because of that, I'm now going to tell you our real estate outlook, which is a lot more normal than you might expect in the midst of a terrible recession like we have right now. So where are we? First, let's start from a capital markets perspective. From a capital markets perspective, we're down about 40% for total deal volume this year from a sales perspective, but I will tell you that we are spiking now in terms of the new deals we are bringing to market. That's down only about 20%. But you know what's back to almost 2019 levels? The depth of our bidding pools. The amount of dry powder, the amount of equity out there is close to normal levels. And what's really encouraging about that equity, it's not all the usual suspects. A lot of this is foreign money. As a matter of fact, foreign money is winning a lot of our largest deals. We have money from South Korea. We have money from Singapore. I have a call with Singapore tonight with one of them at 8 o'clock tonight. Bottom line is, notwithstanding the travel restrictions, foreign money still sees the U.S. not only as a safe haven in the global financial crisis or in this crisis that we have today, but the U.S. is on sale. Let me tell you why it's on sale. It's on sale for two reasons. Number one, because our hedging costs are low. And number two, the U.S. dollar is weak. Some people hedge, cheap hedging. Some people don't hedge, cheap dollar, good and good. And my good friend and colleague, Wei Lo, who's going to speak later today, is going to give you all the details. Isn't that right, Wei? Give me a thumbs up, Wei. There it is. She's right there. Wei is just nervous right now because she's thinking about her pop culture reference. I see my colleague Ed Socha getting all nervous too. See that? Just keeps my team on their toes. That's my job. So from a capital markets perspective, we are in a good but not a great place, because that 40% reduction in deal volume really means this: we're really only selling industrial and multifamily assets. Other assets in the office sector, we are selling a lot of triple net assets. We have one on market right here in Baltimore, a big deal that's about to be announced. Bottom line is that triple net deals in office are the ones that are trading. The big question mark, the big we don't know, is the multi-tenanted office space. And my good friend Ian Anderson, who's going to speak in a moment, is going to tell us more about that. But here's the moment in today's presentation where you say, maybe Spencer went a little bit too far. I'm just going to cut to the chase on the whole work from home thing, okay? There is nobody in the world that has more information on this subject than me. We do every survey. I read every survey. I do econometric analysis for some of the largest investors of the world on this very question. And you know how much office space is going to be reduced due to work from home? I don't know. So if the guy who knows everything doesn't know, and somebody says, oh yeah, it's going to be 5 or 10 or 20%, they don't know either. Which brings me to my forecast for the major asset types. We've broken our forecast into 3 basic categories: 1, 2, 3. 1, those asset classes that are coming back in year 1, 2, year 2, and 3. Well, 3. Some of those predictions, we were too optimistic. Some of them, we were too pessimistic. You know where we were too pessimistic? In the I, in NAIOP. We thought industrial would have a bad day at the office for all of 2020. We were wrong. Industrial had a bad day at the office for a grand total of about 3 weeks. And then it started hitting record levels of rents, land values, and prices. Folks, this is the fall off your chair moment. We are about to trade a $300 million portfolio in Southern California of industrial assets for, drum roll please, Edward, a 2 cap. Did I just say that? Did I just put a 2 handle on that? Yes, I did. Now it's a 2.8 and it's probably a stabilized 3.2, but I just saw sweat dripping down the foreheads of everybody in this room that's on the industrial side. Say, boy, do I sell now? How do I buy at a 3.2 cap or a 2 cap? Well, I'm just going to say this. This is not Spencer's moment to get to his last NAIOP presentation, but there is some concern that there may be just too much money chasing the industrial space at the moment, which is driving prices down. So you just need to be aware of that. Another interesting little side note. I had on my podcast, The Weekly Take, CBRE has a podcast, which I host. A few weeks ago, I had Fred Bowler, who's the CEO of Americold, the largest owner of cold storage in the world. What did Fred say? He says, well, cold storage is great, and I'm the biggest owner in the world, but people are still eating 3 meals a day. They're not eating 4. So what he's saying is that we did not increase aggregate demand for cold storage. We shifted it from restaurants to homes. Then, of course, Fred went off and bought $1.7 billion of new cold storage in the last couple of weeks. So maybe he was just talking his book. But the bottom line is that you have to look at these things through a long-term, not a short-term lens to reach the right decision. So on industrial, we were too pessimistic. Multifamily, we were mixed. I'm sitting right now in my office here in Baltimore, Maryland, about 30 feet from what we call the Twin Towers, Bill Ruhan and Mike Muldowney, who are 2 leaders in our multifamily space here in the region. And we just sold a large portfolio of assets in Arlington, Virginia, sold it for $505 million, which was down about 5-6% from where it was pre-COVID. But that's actually an outlier because most suburban multifamily is almost completely maintaining its occupancy and its value. Where multifamily is taking it on the chin, where we were too optimistic, was in CBD multifamily. There, and I hate to use a word this strong, the story for multifamily in the short term in New York, San Francisco, Chicago is grim. And grim is probably a nice way to put it's grim because the occupancy there is falling like a rock. And there's no, if I'm going to use a fancy economic term, wait, am I allowed to use a fancy economic term on this call? I'm using a fancy economic term. There is no price elasticity for multifamily demand right now in the major markets in the US. And because of that, it's a bad day at the office. Now, what does it mean? Should I go back up the truck and buy this multifamily? Well, you can. Well, if you could, you should, but you can't, so you won't. Because people aren't going to trade at these values, which is why the public security story was where a lot of people had to get in. But that's the bad news. The good news is with the vaccine, the light is at the end of the tunnel, and we're optimistic that we're not going to miss the 2021 leasing season for these major markets. And the leasing season for CBD multifamily is June, July, August. Now, in the 2 categories, office, and I will come back to office again because this is the NAIOP presentation. I know we're spending a lot on the I and the O. By the way, why do we even have to spend any time on the I this week? Because I is just so good. Can we just drop the mic and save everybody an hour and a half? We're just spending most of it on the O, but I'll come back to the O because I want to talk about retail and I want to talk about hotels for a minute. Retail and hotels are obviously disproportionately negatively impacted, but it's a tale of two worlds there as well. So if you take a look at the hotel world, you'll see hotels have three basic categories. They have the international hotel, they have the business hotel, and then they've got the drive to consumer hotel. Now, I will tell you that the international and the business hotel are going to be in for a rough ride. As a matter of fact, our hotel team is so bearish on those hotels that they believe that they may not recover until 2024. They believe that markets like New York City are going to lose at least 20,000 hotel rooms permanently. Yuck. But I will tell you some good news. My wife and I just had our 21st wedding anniversary. And what did we do? Well, last year on our 20th, we went to Vancouver, flew 6 hours to a really, really cool city. This year, we drove to Charlottesville, 3 hours away. And by the way, Charlottesville was sweet. It had a lot of vineyards, and we stayed at a really cool hotel called the Boar's Head, which was booked on Saturday night. Ba-dum-bum. So even hotels have green shoots, lights at the end of the tunnel. Now, retail is also the tale of two worlds, tale of grocery anchored and everybody else. But if you have good grocery anchored with a good pharmacy, you're going to do great. In fact, your prices haven't moved. But if you are beyond that, we're still in a mode of price discovery. I was on the phone the other day with the CEO of a big publicly traded REIT in the retail space. He's like, Spence, go get me some of these great power centers that are located with good demographics for 10 caps. I said, no, because nobody's selling for that. Because even power centers that are struggling from an occupancy standpoint at the moment, there's good demographics. Those things are not 10 cap assets. They're probably 8 cap assets right now. Best grocery anchored assets, bad news, folks. Those are still 5.5 cap assets. So you're not getting discounts on those kind of deals in the best demographic areas. So let me sum up my comments like this, because I want to go to the first break of this conversation for my conversation with the CEO of COPT. The economy is better than you feel in your guts, but we are going to be in for a dark tunnel over the next couple of months before we start to see real light in the spring. Real estate is broken into this 1, 2, 3 scenario where even though I might be the guy who's got the most information about the office space, even I don't know the answer of how much of a secular shift there's going to be. And that's why I brought Ian Anderson, because he's going to give you the specific answer. With respect to retail and hotels, they're going to have a tougher road than others, but good rooftops still mean good retail, and drive-through hotels are doing just fine. So with that, it's time for our first interview of the day. Brian, play the tape. Okay, Brian.
Hold on just a second.
We love Zoom calls. I have a whole repertoire of jokes I could use right now while we're waiting, but hopefully we can get this to work. I'm joined by Steve Bedorick, the CEO of Corporate Office Properties Trust, one of the largest REITs in the U.S. and focusing on the Baltimore-Washington region. Steve, welcome. Well, I am a very good-looking man. I can say that directly, but unfortunately, I don't think you want to be staring at my face right now. I think we want to be looking at Steve. Brian, anything we can do to fix this? If not, we'll skip ahead.
Let me.
Great to be here.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So, Steve, for the benefit of our listeners, for those who don't know you, tell us what you and Corporate Office Property Trust does.
So we are a office REIT that specializes in investing in support of and adjacent to priority U.S. defense missions. Over 88% of our revenue today comes from locations that support priority U.S. defense missions in 4 states: Texas, Alabama, Northern Virginia, and Maryland.
Great. And what makes the Baltimore-Washington region attractive for COPT?
Well, there's a high concentration of high-tech defense activities in the BW corridor, Northern Virginia, and where we are in Alabama and Texas. So those are locations that require high technology employees working on either advanced information technology work or research development, test, evaluation, and capability advancement.
So you mentioned, I think if I heard you correctly, 88% of your revenues are coming from those types of tenants. Are these mostly defense contractors or are they also government agencies?
So our largest tenant is U.S. government. We don't bifurcate what users. It's just one big bucket, but about 35% of our revenue comes from the government. And the rest are large defense contractors. And we have about 12% that are conventional office users.
Well, when you talk about tech, one of the areas of tech, and I know, and I read some of the press releases from COPT, some of the recent work you're doing in the data center space, a deal that you did with Blackstone recently. What's attractive about the data center space as a office developer?
Well, our activity in the data space really surrounds supporting contractors that serve the U.S. government with data center facilities. So it was a natural extension of our work with contractors and the government to provide data center facilities for their use as well. There's a significant overlap in security, redundancy with the capabilities we have and what we develop for the government.
Well, let me ask a question it's a general question about office, but I think it'd be interesting to know how this applies to the government and government contractors, which is work from home. That has been the big thing for the last 6 to 9 months, and it's going to probably last for quite a bit longer. How is the government and government contractors handling the work from home issue? Are they in the office or are they working from home?
You'd be surprised how heavily they are using the office. During the early months of those shutdown periods, about 25% of our portfolio was occupied at normal levels, and another 55 was really occupied at about 50%. And during that period of time, what we experienced were weekly rotations with longer work days in the defense contractor space. And then about 20% of our portfolio, really the general office users and some transitional levels, they were occupying in that 10 to 20% level. We did a canvas of the portfolio, a deep dive in October. And as we sit today, over half the portfolio is utilized at a normal level. Another 40% is over 50% utilization, and only 10% is lightly occupied. And that largely represents our downtown Baltimore office investments and a couple we have in Tyson's Corner.
Well, that's actually consistent with what I'm hearing from my colleagues in New York, where they're suggesting that their occupancy in Manhattan is hovering between 5 and 15%, depending upon where it's located. And it really seems as though this is a phenomenon that's disproportionately impacting downtown areas. I suspect most of your other assets are located in suburban areas or near military bases. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So let's push that topic just a little bit more. One of the questions we get asked a lot now is about the future of office. Are people going to demand less office space in the future? I'd like to know your point of view on that generally, and then specifically as it relates to the government and government contractors.
So generally, well, first of all, I think we have more data about the impact of the virus in the office environment than any other company. And so to that point, let me just share a few facts. Over our 20 million square foot portfolio, over 8 months, with higher utilization in the office than most office companies, we've only had 90 cases over 20 million square feet. Within our own company, with over 400 employees, we've only had 18 cases. In every instance, the transmission occurred outside of work within our company. And we have zero evidence of employee to employee transmission. Now, mind you, we've been working at 50% weekly rotations since June. So we're a leader in returning to the office. So when I look at the long-term impact, the future of office, I think there's going to be a couple of offsetting trends. I think people will recognize that you can manage an office environment with this health scare. And unquestionably, in our own experience, the employees are happier coming to work than they are working from home in a huge ratio. And I think there is a cohort that likes to work from home. So I think companies will, one, accommodate a cohort to what I call more of a mean or a normal, where some of the really advanced shrink the footprint, like hot benching and desking, or hot desking and benching, will reverse, and that people will have slightly larger cubes, a little more personal space. Overall, I'd say it's a neutral to a slight positive for office as we manage our way through this environment.
So that's a very interesting opinion, neutral to slightly positive, because I think that is certainly more optimistic than we're hearing from some. But let me also push on another area that we're hearing from some office developers, which is flex space. Obviously, we've heard about the travails of co-working regarding WeWork. What's your point of view on the future of flex space as part of your office portfolio?
So with regard to our portfolio, I see very little of that at all. We do have a couple of shared office tenants in defense locations that facilitate smaller startup companies, but those companies tend to mature into their own office space. Remember, in the defense world, security is a maximum priority. So working in a non-secure, unprotected environment just doesn't fit in the national defense model.
Yeah, so it certainly seems as though the nature of your tenants is driving part of your point of view on flex space. Maybe other types of tenants would view it somewhat differently. So let me talk now again about something else you mentioned, Steve, if I can, that the majority of your portfolio, certainly in this region, is in the suburban area, but you do own some assets in the CBD of Baltimore. What's your point of view on the future of CBD, central business districts? Do you think that they are in jeopardy because of the pandemic, or will they come back?
CBDs have always been a more expensive place to rent office space, but the value proposition paid off because employees wanted to work in those environments for the interaction with friends and workers and the value proposition of the retail and the lifestyle. If that lifestyle deteriorates, then the premium's not going to be worth it to attract and retain talent. And I think suburban office would dominate in those locations. So New York is very different than LA from a transit standpoint. Think about it in that context.
So let's talk about Baltimore very quickly. If you were to make any suggestions about folks that are thinking about using office space in Baltimore, moving to Baltimore, what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, it's a very accessible CBD and primarily accessible by vehicle. There is some public transportation, but you don't need to rely on it. And it's convenient to get in and out of, and it's a great kind of amenitized environment. And as we move out of the lockdowns, I think that level of energy will come back a bit.
Great. So are you bullish on the future of Baltimore?
I continue to be.
All right, last question, and this is the most important one, and you're not allowed to hedge. Orioles or Nationals?
Well, I moved from Chicago, but I'll go Orioles. I'll go Orioles.
All right. Well, thank you for that answer. That makes everything okay. Well, Steve, on behalf of NAIOP, we thank you for taking the time We wish you well at COPT, and we really appreciate you sharing your ideas with our audience.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, Steve seemed pretty bullish, not only on his portfolio, but Baltimore and the region. But let's get a second opinion on this. And so now I want to call my good friend Wei Z. Where is Wei? Wei?
Right here. Hi, Spencer.
Hello, Wei. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am great. Well, Steve was pretty bullish on the region, pretty bullish on office. We'd love to hear what you think. And Wei, for the folks who don't know, Wei is the leader of our Baltimore, Washington research group. She's terrific. And Wei, take it away.
Thank you, Spencer, and good morning, everyone. Believe it or not, I am one of the two Weis who will be presenting to you today from CBRE. So what are the chances? But I will spend the next few minutes on our region specifically with some granular data, both on the economy and commercial real estate. So first off, I want to check the box for the cultural reference. So the good, the bad, and the ugly of the economy is what I will start with. Even though, Spencer, I actually have not watched the movie, I'm going to put it on my list. I'll start with the ugly. So as we all know, the impact of the shutdown on the labor market was pretty immediate and drastic. By May, Maryland has lost 1 out of every 2 leisure and hospitality jobs that existed back in beginning of the year. Most other employment sectors contracted a little bit less, but still by 10 to 15%. In total, by May, almost 400,000 people in Maryland lost their jobs in just 4 months, and unemployment rate more than tripled from 3% to 10%. That said, things did get better. With our region's more cautious approach toward the pandemic, our cases of infection have been consistently better contained relative to the rest of the country. By June, most jurisdictions were able to ease out of the shutdown, and by September, we regained half of the jobs that were previously lost, and unemployment dropped back down to 7%. Furthermore, this downturn has had far less of an impact on white-collar jobs. Professional and financial services employment only contracted by about 9% at the trough, which was relatively mild, and by September, it was only down 6%. Companies have been able to hold on to most employees as they remain relatively and largely productive working from home. And I've been working from home since mid-March, and I'm absolutely dying to get out of the house, like probably most people on this call, but I don't think it has affected our performance all that much over the past few months. Based on post-pandemic surveys done by the census, the DC metro region ranks #1 nationally in terms of the share of residents working from home, and Maryland as a state ranks #5. So our highly educated workforce, our large share of white-collar jobs, and the stabilizing effect from the federal government and government contractors, as Steve mentioned, are all factors that have helped sustain jobs and overall economic activity in the DMV region. So how has this all affected commercial real estate? I'll start with the O. So the office market usually tends to be a lagging indicator following a recession, but this time it's in the eye of the storm. I know Steve mentioned in the interview that, for buildings filled with government agencies and government contractors, occupancy level was still relatively stable, but our data shows as of October, overall office buildings in our region was only about 25% of occupancy compared to pre-COVID levels. And that number will likely remain modest in the coming months. Another side effect that's typical of a recession, and certainly is compounded this time by this work from home experiment, is that we're seeing more and more tenants putting their space up for sublease. Since April 1st, 3.6 million square feet of sublease availability has been added by hundreds of tenants across the DMV region. And we've been tracking this, on a daily basis. There was a huge uptick right around 4th of July where the rate of sublease addition doubled. But the good news is that it seems to have plateaued over the past 4 months. So hopefully we are not going to see another major uptick. So that's for the existing tenants, basically largely still not returned to the office, and some are contemplating space disposition. As for new activity, we're tracking leasing volume very closely as well. And overall volume is down about 40% year over year and skewed towards shorter term leases and renewals, while sizable relocations remain few and far between. With the shutdown, touring activity dropped by more than 90% year over year in April and May. and the few tours that we had at CBRE were mostly virtual. Fortunately, tenants are slowly re-engaging, and touring activity has been consistently improving to roughly 50% now compared to same time last year. And most of the tours are now back in person. That said, tenants that are active at the moment typically have more imminent occupancy needs, while tenants with some luxury of time remain on the sidelines. While demand has tapered quite a bit, as I mentioned, the silver lining is that new construction activity has also slowed down significantly, which will help limit the supply pipeline. Although there are still some projects to wrap up that started pre-COVID, almost no notable groundbreakings have taken place so far this year across the region. And any future developments will likely require substantial pre-leasing commitments. We are also seeing applications to convert older and less competitive office buildings into multifamily, which, if happens in scale, will also help bring down the supply overhang. So lastly, for my part, to end on a more positive note, while the office market is still clearly challenged, there are certain bright spots in other verticals, as Spencer mentioned, and the trends hold true for our region as well. I'll touch on two quickly today. One is the industrial market, as well as life sciences. So with the steady growth in e-commerce and a quick fun sort of fact for the group, 50 of the 100 most affluent counties in the US are within an overnight drive from the Port of Baltimore. So we continue to see increased demand for logistics space, and we are seeing continued growth in user demand and industrial rents, as well as robust activity from tenants of all sizes, from 5 to 10,000 square feet tenants all the way to 1 million square feet plus tenants. The capital markets, as Spencer mentioned earlier, is also very active, with prices actually exceeding pre-COVID levels and investors being very competitive at chasing opportunities. And secondly, as we all know, our region is a top life sciences cluster in the US, and this sector has seen tremendous uptick in both government investment as well as venture capital investment. Johns Hopkins, for example, receives more funding from the NIH than any other universities and research institutions nationally. Another fun fact, while 6% of all federal contract spending takes place in Maryland, that number goes up to 10% for COVID-related contractors. So this is all translating into strong user demand and rent growth for lab and biomanufacturing space in our region. So to wrap up, one of my favorite COVID quotes is that you can't expect the entire corporate America to work from home for 6 months and the future of real estate not to change. So I think there's little doubt that many aspects of our industry will change fundamentally, and the new normal will emerge, both from the physical and mechanical aspects of buildings to how space will be viewed and utilized by its consumers. With that, back to you, Spencer.
Well, thank you, Wei. Wei, let me ask you a couple of questions here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
First of all, I like the Good, the Bad, the Ugly reference from Clint Eastwood, one of my favorite movies of all time, and I do encourage you to watch that picture.
I will.
All right. Well, in terms of encouraging, most of the people on this call are in the Baltimore region, closer to Baltimore than they are to Washington. And you gave some of the highlights, including industrial, including life sciences, including our proximity of our port to so many other places. What can you say about the office market here in Baltimore? Is there anything that you could say that what if people are going to go make a choice to come to Baltimore, Columbia, or DC, make the case for Baltimore?
Yep. So I think, looking back in time, because, right now, like you say, a heat of a moment, it feels like the whole world is crashing down. But if we look at numbers, over the past 20 years, for the Baltimore metro region, the office market, I would say, is characterized by stable. It's a stable market. It does not have the major fluctuations that downtown DC and Northern Virginia tends to see with, major supply pipeline that comes and really kind of jack up vacancy rates or a major loss of tenant occupancy. So I think with it's buoyed by the federal government, by cybersecurity, which is another tremendous industry that has seen a lot of growth over the years and will continue to remain a driver of demand. I think that the characteristic of the Baltimore metro region will remain one that is relatively stable and insulated from larger fluctuations that may exist in other markets.
Great. Thank you, Wei. So really what you're saying about Baltimore is got a great diversity of industry, but really the industries around defense, around biotech, around the hospitals, the port, Those are the real economic drivers of this region.
Yep, and those are the ones that tend to be insulated from recessions and downturns because they're all more or less, as we see, essential economy of our region.
Well, as noted by our last speaker, many of them are insulated from work from home too, because it's pretty hard to do biotech from your basement.
That's right.
All right, before we turn to our next speaker now, Ian Anderson, to talk about the office space, this is my first little nudge against everybody here. Folks, I did an AAP event last week in Chicago, the week before Vegas. I did an event in Budapest yesterday, and I got more questions than this, okay? I'm telling you, I'm going to either A, start calling you out because I know most of you on this call, or B, I'm going to describe how badly the Ravens played on Sunday night against the Patriots, all call unless and until we start getting some questions. So start thinking about that while I pass the baton to my good friend, Ian Anderson, who's going to talk about the office market. Ian.
Thank you, Spencer. I will try and be relatively quick. I think we're getting maybe a little bit behind here. I'm going to start out with, hopefully, I always try and find the silver lining in what we're dealing with right now. So let me start with maybe a positive note here. And that regards office using employment growth or office using industries. When the crisis first hit, office using industries were generally insulated. It really hit the tourism, hospitality, leisure industry worse. So we were kind of happy when the crisis first hit. Then we moved into summer and we never got the rebound that some of those other industries got. Well, over the last 2 months, if you look at the data, office using industries actually have been growing faster than total employment in the United States. So hopefully that is a good sign we're moving in the right direction. But office markets or office leasing activities generally still staying pretty frozen. So total US office leasing activity is down 40% from 1 year ago. However, again, we saw some good movement here in the last quarter through the end of September. We actually improved in leasing across the United States in Q3 as opposed to Q2. But as you said, the virus is rearing its ugly head again. We're looking into a dark tunnel, as you said. So that's probably some of that momentum we had probably is going to be stymied as we go into the winter. So really quickly about U.S. office market fundamentals, because they're deteriorating rapidly, and with the winter approaching, it's going to get worse before it gets better. But in the quarter ending September, we saw U.S. office vacancy rise by 100 basis points to 14% across the U.S. That's the largest increase in vacancy that we've seen since 2001. The amount of negative net absorption we saw in Q2 and Q3 was worse than all of what we saw during the global financial crisis. Obviously, downtowns are getting hit worse than the suburbs, mainly due to its reliance on mass transit, elevators, density, et cetera. But for the most part, the real brunt of this crisis thus far has happened in 3 main places. One, it's generally speaking, it's the New York metropolitan area, and we're not even seeing any good improvement in the suburbs. So some people have thought, you might see companies go to New Jersey or Westchester, et cetera. We're not seeing any of that. There's just distress across the whole metro. 2, California, the Bay Area, Los Angeles, all bad. And then thirdly, Texas, mainly due to supply, but they've got a little more liquidity in those markets, more low density, less restriction based upon COVID. So we saw a lot of sublease space there. So that brings you to what's happening in the Mid-Atlantic area in Baltimore and Washington, DC. It's really hard to tell an audience or anybody, any of our professionals this when we're in such distressful times, but believe it or not, at least from the data, from an office perspective, is Baltimore and DC are really relatively insulated from this downturn. So thus far, year to date, negative net absorption in DC and Baltimore, we've got about 500,000 square feet negative net absorption. In Manhattan, they've had 10 million square feet of negative net absorption. In San Francisco, they've had negative 4.2 million. So obviously things are not good, but considering the relative circumstances, we're still relatively insulated going through this. So finally, just to maybe wrap up really quickly, because the elephant in the room is work from home. How is this going to impact everything? So a couple things. One is that absolutely we're seeing across the country more and more companies coming to our professionals and saying that perhaps they don't need as much office space that they originally needed. Even if they're in active requirements, they're saying we need to reduce that requirement because work from home is working so well. But how severe this actually becomes, you're right, Spence, it remains to be seen. I still think that, well, one, we're all going to be chomping at the bit to get back in offices. That's the first thing. And then two, it's going to take a long time for this to play out. It's not like all of a sudden the spring's going to come and everyone's going to be like, you know what, we're not going to need office space. This is probably going to play out for years. Having said all that, no doubt about it, we're all going to be working from home. We're going to be working from home. We're going to be working remotely more often. It's going to impact the office market in a certain way. I imagine it's probably going to affect a flight to quality. So we're going to see a rush to more higher quality buildings, but that still remains to be seen. And having said all that, Spence, I'm getting a new roof on my house right now, and I had to yell out my window to have my roofer stop for 15 minutes so I could speak here. So if this work from home thing's working great, please tell me about it.
Well, the one thing I would like to say, Ian, is first of all, I don't want to stop your roofer from working. You're probably paying for that 15 minutes.
Looking out my window, I stopped him there. Yeah.
Well, good work there, Ian. So a couple of things. And first of all, thank you for the couple of questions in the chat room. We'll get to those in a moment. But Ian, before I ask you how you are able to so effectively double hat as being a terrific research professional and being the lead singer / flutist for Jethro Tull,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, what is your opinion of flex space? Am I the only guy who got the Jethro Tull joke? I mean, come on, guys. This is
Well, some of them.
Jan got it. See that? We got one person, one thumbs up there. But let me ask you a question about, Edward got it too. Flex space.
Yeah.
So our prior speaker, the CEO of COPT, Steve Burdock, was actually pretty bearish on flex space. He says, well, we don't need that much of it because we got defense contractors. Is he an outlier? Do you think that you're going to see more flex space rather than less post-pandemic?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more flex space. Yep. I think the industry, you can clearly see it right now. It's going through turmoil. If you look at our leasing activity, there is barely any, literally no leasing demand, obviously contraction from some of the flex space providers, but I think it's going through a reinvention right now. I think that WeWork has surprised most anyone's predictions for their demise. And if I recall correctly, and Spence, you may know better than I believe they're forecasting a return to profitability by the end of 2021, if I recall correctly. So they will come back stronger, and we're going to see more of our clients use it more often, so that if I need office space quickly for one call like this, I can jump out, go to a convenient location while my roof is getting done, rather than having to go to the office. Great.
Well, thank you, Ian. And now we're going to turn to the chat room. And there are several questions in here because you were all sweating about another play-by-play of the Patriots game. So let's now talk about first question from Ketch Secor, my colleague. Hello, Ketch. E-commerce, Amazon, leasing and absorption phenomenon, will it continue as COVID goes away? Well, what we've seen this year is what we call hockey stick growth and the e-commerce penetration of retail. I think you're going to see hockey stick growth next year, but I think you're going to see hockey stick growth negatively next year. Now, when I say negatively, doesn't mean we're going to get below 2020 levels. We're going to be well above 2019 levels, but it's not going to go, trees don't grow to the sky, and neither does e-commerce penetration. And so this goes back to my initial comment before, is there's increasing chatter that industrial may have seen its best days in terms of its capital markets values. There's so much money chasing the space, forecasting so much growth in e-commerce. So to your question, Ketch, e-commerce penetration is going to slow next year, may go negative, but it still will be at a much higher plane than it was in 19, and then will continue to grow thereafter. Next, cold storage question. What are you seeing developers do to prepare for the amount of cold storage that is forecasted to be needed for the COVID vaccine? Well, I think there's apples and oranges here, right? The cold storage that we're talking about here on this call that's relevant to the NAIOP members is cold storage that stores food, not drugs. The cold storage that's required for transporting drugs at negative 94 degrees, or whatever the Pfizer drug needs, is extraordinarily specialized and is not something that is a very large space that's really investable. Now, speaking about investable, I'll talk about another sector that gets a lot of love, which is life sciences. And I just did a gig a couple of weeks ago on CNBC with Wexford and University of Maryland, right over here downtown near Ravens Stadium. We love the space. They love the space. You know how big the life sciences space is nationally? It's 140 million square feet, right? We have more than 140 million square feet with 3 or 4 of the developers on this call. All right, it's a very small space, not investable. So the COVID crisis is not going to increase demand for COVID. Certainly not the type of cold storage that I think is investable. Next question. Let's see here. Will PPE production and manufacturing be sustainable or a trend based upon the current situation? It will be sustainable from the following standpoint. I was on a phone call last week with Parag Khanna. Parag Khanna is one of the world's premier demographers. And he said that the world is shifting from a global world to a regional world, meaning that you're going to see more manufacturing and other trade going not from US to China, but from the US to Canada, Mexico, and South America. And so back to your question about PPE production, will it come back? Yes. Will it be durable? Yes, but it's not just going to be PPE. It's going to be other manufacturing. But one of the keys here is immigration. Immigration is one of the great limiting factors of bringing manufacturing back to the United States. A lot of people think immigration just impacts the tech industry. It does not. Most manufacturing that happens here in the United States is high-tech, automated, and they need skilled labor that knows how to build this stuff. And a lot of this stuff comes from overseas. And so when you speak to our labor incentives group, he said there's no shortage of people who want to reshore. There is a shortage of skilled labor who know how to put the plant together. So before I get to the rest of your questions in just a moment, it's now my pleasure to turn to my colleague, Way Low, Way number 2, and Way Z. What are the odds of 2 Ways on the same call? Well, Way Low, where are you? And Way Z, tell us a little bit more about the capital markets. So Way, take it away.
Thank you, Spencer. Yes, I'm Way Low, the second Way on this call. I'm based in New York, working from home at the moment, but I have returned to office several days a week now. I'm going to add some color to Spencer's earlier capital markets overview. He has provided some very fundamental numbers. I'm just going to give you a little bit more details so you get the story of the capital markets recovery. Yes, year to date, global investment volume declined by 40%, roughly 40%. If we rank the regions by their activity compared to last year, EMEA or Europe mainly, down by 10%. Then it's Asia Pacific, down by 30%. Then it's Americas, down by 45%. Now, this can be a little misleading because Europe was actually hit the hardest in Q2 and Q3, but Europe had a record-setting Q1, which was a strong base in their full-year investment volume. So Europe looks okay year to date, but in fact, it was hurt very much during the lockdown period, and even in Q3, half of the markets were worsening than Q2. Now, Asia Pacific was leading the recovery in capital markets activity. Because in terms of timing, Asia Pacific was hit the first, and then the recovery shaped or became informed in Asia Pacific first. So we saw a lot of markets like South Korea, Taiwan, and even India had a very strong recovery in Q3, which was very positive to global activity recovery. Then there's Americas. It wasn't the worst. It's recovering, but slowly. Now, I haven't really got any questions on capital markets, but I'm going to assume you will ask me what's driving activity. And here's my pop culture reference. If you have heard a Coldplay song called How Long, I think the lyrics are perfect, accurate description of investment sentiment now. It's about where do I go? It's about how long before you decide. So, transactions in real estate are not like consumer spending or stock trading. It takes time. We need to wait for the deal flow to come through. We need to build the pipeline. So real estate transactions typically lag economic recovery by 2 to 3 quarters. Depends on the depth of the recession. But in Q3, we saw that some markets, the markets that managed the pandemic relatively well, are leading the recovery. I named a few: South Korea, Taiwan, even India. India was an exception. I'm going to explain more about that market later. But in Asia Pacific, we saw economies that managed the pandemic relatively well are leading their activity recovery. This is not a surprise to anybody because there's more confidence in the market, there's more normality in the market, more mobility. This helps activity to recover. And then are big cities doomed? I think Spencer touched on this a little bit. We saw different trends across regions. In the US, yes, investors are more cautious about big cities. New York, LA, San Francisco, these markets saw investment volume drop by 40% year to date. However, we saw more investment into suburban areas. I saw a question in the comments that Kevin Keehan asked if there's more investment into suburban areas. And that is correct. We saw more investment into suburban areas, and we think that's going to last, especially if working from home is here to stay. We think suburban may have some long-term tailwind going for them. And then how about office? This is the second thing I think drive investment volume is investor preference. Industrial is now the new retail. You know, in the past 10 years, maybe industrial wasn't seen as the best, the preferred investment opportunities, but now it is. The share of industrial investment increased from 16% last year to 20% this year. Just shows how strong the confidence, how strong the investor preference has been for industrial assets. And we don't really see an end there. I think industrial is going to be strong because of these robust e-commerce growth, this continued consumer demand for online shopping, for logistics. So we think industrial is going to be strong for quite a long time. Office, we have different trends. In the US, there are some cautious approach taken by investors about mega city office. There's just a lot of uncertainty here. We don't know when people will return to the office. But in Asia Pacific, we see the opposite. Investors are even more confident or are pouring more money into downtown office buildings in mega cities, in Beijing, in Tokyo, in Seoul, in Sydney. We saw ever strong investment appetite for downtown office buildings because office in Asia Pacific is still seen as the safe haven or where the stable income come from or where the downturn protection come from. So we see very different preferences here. But then the secular shift on industrial, on healthcare, on data center, on these alternative investment is the second trend I'm going to mention here because we know these markets, these sectors are red hot right now because they are seen as downturn protected sectors for investors to get that income when the economy is bad. And the third thing I'm going to mention is long-term trend. This is when I'll talk about cross-border investment. So Spencer talked about how US became a preferred destination for cross-border capital. That is very true. But I'm going to mention a very different example. I'm going to mention India here. For those of you that are not very familiar with India, India in Q3 wasn't a leader in managing the pandemic. In fact, COVID was in a pretty bad shape in India during Q3. However, India recorded its largest deal in history in Q3 last quarter because Brooksfield Asset Management spent $2 billion to buy an office portfolio in India, including a co-working business. So there's your flex office hope for other markets. So we think this is going to continue. We'll see more deals like this. Blackstone reportedly is investing another $2 billion into India. This is what we call long-term trend, right? India wasn't managing the pandemic very well. The fundamentals may not look very pretty, but people believe in the long-term growth potential of India office markets because India is now the center for outsourcing businesses. And tailwinds like this will last very long. So in the US, bring back to the US, we see the similar trend in Dallas, in Denver, in Atlanta. They have outperformed their peers because they have very long-term demographic trend going for them. They have strong job growth. They have migration increasing. They have multifamily sector ever strong. So people are very interested in investing in these markets where they can bet on long-term growth, regardless how the office sector will perform. But if there's more people in the market, then real estate in that market is going to have a very bright future. How about next year? We think next year will be stronger, but not fully back to normal. We're being very cautious in predicting 10% growth next year for the full year global investment volume. We think it can be very conservative if we have a vaccine, and by the end of the year, if vaccine is effectively distributed across the country, things may be very different. We may have a very strong rebound, but for now, we're being very cautiously optimistic.
Well, thank you, Wei, and great job in all areas except for one. I forgot to mention that all pop culture references have to be pre-1980 because I had to look up who Coldplay was. But that's the bad news.
Get out if it's not in invented years.
That's the bad news. The good news is that you get double points if you mention either Burt Reynolds or Barbra Streisand's album Guilty. So just keep that in mind as you give your future answers. But Wei, let's go back to something I mentioned before. And I think that I just took a look at the Chinese renminbi, and it's trading at about 6.6 renminbi per dollar. I took a look at some of the trades we have coming here from Singapore, from South Korea, from Spain, from Israel, a lot of foreign money. So you mentioned only a 10% rise next year in capital markets activity. I actually disagree. I think it's going to be a lot more than that. I think it's going to be spurred by international money. What's your point of view on how much international money we're going to get next year in the U.S.?
Yes, to your point earlier on Chinese exchange rate, we cannot bet on a lot of Chinese capital in the US right now because capital control is very much in place. So that is a downside. But the upside is South Korean, Singapore, Taiwan, investors from these markets are really aggressive in investing in the US because of low hedging cost and because US is considered a safe market. You know, if there's a lot of uncertainty around, US seems to be the market with the most certainty. So investors are very confident in the US and they have great interest in investing in the US. We have seen a lot of deals in the past 2 quarters. They're betting big money on US office market, suburban markets, industrial assets. This is not a new trend. This is a pre-existing trend. Before COVID started, these Asian capital and European capital have been targeting US real estate for a long time. But hedging cost is another issue that I think worth noting. US dollar became very strong in the downturn, right? In Q2 and Q3, US dollar became very strong. And this gave Asian investors and European investors a hedging advantage, right? If they can bet on the future depreciation of the US dollar, that means they secure additional returns when they sell in the future. I'm not sure if this is too technical, but this is what happens when you have a very strong dollar, you have additional returns when the dollar depreciate against your currency, home currency in the future. This is an advantage for foreign investors. But dollar has come down a little bit, the value has depreciated a little bit, so the hedging advantage has narrowed, but yet it still exists. So it's still a good time. There's still a window open for foreign investors, especially for emerging market investors, like in Brazil, Mexico, in China, but the capital control is still there. So we cannot bet on Chinese money to be very widely available, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Well, thank you, Wei. Let me sum up Wei's comments in my words. Next year will be like the Burt Reynolds classic, the Cannonball Run, with how much money is flying across America from foreign capital sources. You heard it here first. A ton of money's coming in, low hedging costs. Well done, Wei. Okay, now we're going to go to a few of your questions from the chat room, and then we're going to turn to data centers, but let's go to the chat room first. First question is, we're seeing several downtown office tenants touring relo options in the suburbs. Are you seeing this? Short answer, on a short-term basis, yes. For flex space, yes. Permanent relos, no. Now, Baltimore is a different dynamic than is New York, than is San Francisco, than is Chicago, and certain markets like that. So yes, you might see normal office tenants reloading to the suburbs here more on a percentage basis than you would in those major cities. But overall, most cities are seeing these reloads only on a temporary basis. Next question, debt capital markets question. Where is my debt capital markets question, which I just read? Okay, debt capital markets question. Do you think there will be some relief for CRE owners who have balloon payments coming due and can't find refinance options during COVID? Second question is, will banks and investors want to foreclose on a downtown office asset with my market not yet recovering. Okay, well, this is the tale of two worlds. World number one are those places that are not CMBS debt. And I say world number two is CMBS debt. That first world is world that is governed by the FDIC for American banks, and it's governed by the ECB for European banks. And so one of my good buddies runs one of those European banks, and he's got an $8 billion loan book here in the United States, $5 billion of which is hotels and malls. What has he done? He has given covenant relief to his borrowers through the end of 2021. I'm hearing similar stories for publicly traded REITs that are also FDIC and or ECB borrowers. Where I'm not hearing that story is with respect to CMBS borrowers. That is going to be an enormous problem. So I have on my call coming up in about an hour, one of the heads of the real estate roundtable, and we talked about what was known as the HOPE Act. The HOPE Act was supposed to bail out CMBS by allowing preferred equity to come in there at about 2%. It's not going to happen. And because it's not going to happen, you're going to see significant fallout starting in the springtime, primarily in retail and in hotels. But for CMBS debt that saddles underperforming office buildings, you might see it there as well. So look out for the spring. That's where you're going to see distress, and it's going to be disproportionately with respect to conduit debt. Last question before we turn to data centers. Is self-storage still a strong sector? Will evictions help hurt that business sector? Before I go into my favorite Lifetime show, Storage Wars, and some of those episodes are pretty funny. Self-storage is a great sector. It's performing very well. But self-storage is also a very local sector. So I was talking to my head of my self-storage practice the other day, and we're talking about Dallas. Dallas has more self-storage per square foot than anybody, but it's strong because Dallas is growing and it's very local. When you look at self-storage, like in retail, you look at concentric circles 3, 5, 10 miles out. Self-storage are looking like a mile. It's very, very tight. So it's a very good market, very investable. The cap rates are continuing to be under pressure going down. So we like self-storage a lot. But you know what we like more than self-storage? We like data centers. And to help us talk about data centers, I've got my good friend and colleagues, Ed Sosha, who wrote our latest report on data centers, which is available to everybody if you want it. Ed, take it away.
Hey, thank you, Spencer. I'm going to buck the trend here and share my screen. I just have 3 slides, so don't get too worried here. Good morning, everyone. It is great to be here with all.
By the way, your screen's not being shared in case you know, Ed.
Oh, it's not showing?
No, I don't know if it's a function, but if not, you're going to have to just wing it without it.
1 second here. Let's try this again.
It's being shared for us.
Share screen. Can you guys see this up here?
Yes.
Let's see, okay. All right. Well, it's great to be here, albeit on Zoom. Isn't it interesting how these virtual meetings or summits have become to feel so much more normal? You know, I remember back in March when the pandemic was still in its infancy here in the US, and everyone was scrambling to learn how to use these video conferencing services. Now it's become such an integral part of our work schedules that Zoom protocol almost feels second nature. You know, and as the year went on and COVID continued to disrupt the normalcy of day-to-day life, offices closed their doors and employers and employees alike adapted to their new work from home routines. In March, we saw Zoom usage jump 20-fold in a single month from 10 million meetings a day to 200 million meetings a day. By April, this figure was up to 300 million meetings per day. We also saw an enormous uptick in the amount of content being streamed, whether it be movies or YouTube videos or various streaming services. The dislocation of the American employee lent itself to a shift in the amount of data traversing the internet, where it is stored and how it is disseminated to end users. Now, with so-called Zoom fatigue running rampant across corporate America, I'm sure many of you are wondering why the heck I'm mentioning this at all. Well, the fact of the matter is that while many commercial real estate asset classes struggled this year with the economic downturn, during government mandated shutdowns and stay-at-home orders, data centers fared better than many, partly due to the critical role they play in supporting continued business operations and keeping us connected on platforms like Zoom. So with regards to the REIT performance, data center REITs are currently up over 20% year to date. About 3 weeks to a month ago, they were up over 30%. As we all know, those ebb and flow. These data center REITs, along with what we refer to as infrastructure REITs, highlight the strength of technology real estate and the bullish investor sentiment driving a flow of capital to the space. Here, we see them compared to more traditional asset class REITs, industrial, office, and retail. Now, prior to 2020, the industry had already been seeing momentum as enterprise data centers users began to adopt hybrid IT initiatives. So what this means is that they were and continue to diversify where and how they store and access their data, like moving some of it to the cloud, keeping some of it on premises, identifying what data security was necessary for securing sensitive information. As there is continued innovation in the tech space, infrastructure needs to be able to adapt to support to this ever-growing amount of data being shared and consumed. I mean, this data is growing exponentially. With innovations such as AI, artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, we have cloud and edge computing. All these things are adding to a dramatic increase in data consumption, and a need for robust infrastructure to handle this increased bandwidth is imperative to keeping things like Zoom up and running and operating smoothly. So think about online banking. You don't have to go into your branch anymore. You can essentially choose, your choice of banks is no longer limited to just what's down the street from you. We're also seeing emerging telemedicine technologies. So instead of having to, bring my father to the VA, I can open the computer and get him on board with the doctor there. So all these things that need to be supported by reliable and secure data infrastructure are becoming more and more apparent every day. So lastly here, there are 7 primary markets in the US when it comes to wholesale colocation data centers. Now, wholesale colocation data centers sounds like a lot of jargon, but it's data centers where a provider acts as a landlord to companies leasing space and power to support their servers. Now you can see on the screen here, these markets are Dallas, Silicon Valley, Chicago, Phoenix, New York Tri-State, Atlanta, and last but certainly not least, your neighbors across the Potomac in Northern Virginia. Now, Northern Virginia is the largest data center market in the world, with over 1.3 gigawatts of wholesale colocation inventory. Now, it's important to note in the data center world that we measure metrics like absorption, not by square feet, but by the electricity required to operate the IT systems housed there, the cooling systems, backup generators, et cetera. So the reason that Northern Virginia has been able to grow this sector so significantly, I believe since 2015, they've had about 200% growth. It's due to a few things. So the existing infrastructure in Loudoun County and Prince William County, specifically fiber connectivity, the affordable cost of power in the area, relatively affordable land costs in, again, Loudoun County and Prince William County. Now, this is compared to areas like Silicon Valley, where Loudoun County, we might be seeing $1 million or $2 million per acre, versus Silicon Valley, where we could see $16 million per acre. And for land that's suitable for data center development. And tax incentives that are geared specifically towards data center development. The Loudoun County Economic Development Board saw the growth potential of the industry and incentivized telecom giants to create what is now known as Data Center Alley, or some refer to it as the center of the internet. Now, back in May of this year, Maryland passed Senate Bill 397, which creates a new exemption from the state's sales and use tax for the sale of qualified property to data centers. So it's these types of tax incentives that help to drive telecom and data center players to select markets. We're seeing this very thing in areas like Hillsboro, Oregon, where they have affordable, clean power driven by hydroelectricity, as well as affordable land options, solid network infrastructure, and relatively mild climates for data center development. So with more and more digital information being consumed every day, and that trend is not going anywhere, the importance of data centers has never been more apparent. And as we continue to evolve technologically, these high quality data centers that are well connected and are supported by robust networks are going to be the backbone of future innovation. And with that, Spencer, I will hand it back to you.
Well, thank you, Ed. You're still not off the pop culture route. So I'm going to start with the following quote. Damn it, Jim, I need more power. And that's what I think about when I think about data centers. Carl Lehman didn't like that joke. I saw that head shaking. He knew the reference. Didn't like that, Carl? Gabby liked that. It was a downer. All right. Well, Ed, speaking of power, you mentioned that one of the reasons why Northern Virginia is a great place for data centers is that they have cheap power. Well, the reason why they need power is because data centers use a lot of it. In fact, according to an article in The Economist 2 years ago, it said that 2 years ago, data centers use 7% of all of the world's power. That was 2 years ago. It's probably closer to 8 or 9% now. So because of that need for cheap power, how do you think that's going to impact the location of these data centers? And do you ever see them going north, like really far north, like Canada, Iceland, those kind of places, because of the cold weather, which is really free cold air?
Yes, absolutely, Spencer. So I mentioned previously Hillsboro, Oregon. So that's the West Coast. Now let's look at Montreal. So Montreal has Hydro-Quebec up there, and Hydro-Quebec is providing Montreal with tremendously clean, very cheap energy. I believe it's 2.5 to 3.5 cents kilowatt hour Canadian. Now, if you compare that to a Toronto, which is north of 13 cents a kilowatt hour Canadian, it's no wonder why people are beginning to migrate to those areas. And on top of that, with so many of these large tech companies looking to have sustainable portfolios and become green, you're going to see kind of a migration to these places with hydroelectric power, and you're going to see virtual power purchase agreements from solar and wind farms. And I think that's going to be one of the key drivers.
Thank you, Ed. So I'm going to answer one of your questions, and then I'm going to turn to an interview of Jim Lighthizer in just a moment. But here's your question from Tom Ballantyne. What assumptions about additional federal COVID stimulus are built into your outlook? Well, we're having that debate later today, but we estimate about $1 trillion. Now, about $1 trillion is a big about, because it could be 500 billion, it could be 2.5 trillion. But I think what happened, because there was no quote unquote blue wave within Congress, because the Senate and House seats were lost, whatever people's assumptions were for a mega package closer to that 2.5 billion are off the table. Probably going to be closer to that 1 trillion, and that is built into our numbers. Now, there are areas that could increase that over time, because we need more stimulus than just keeping the lights on stimulus, which we have today, for things like infrastructure. So I have some optimism that that type of spending could increase that amount from 1 trillion to a significantly higher number if there are so-called shovel-ready projects, which is a question in and of itself. But now it is my pleasure to introduce Jim Lighthizer, the managing partner at Chesapeake Real Estate Group. Jim, how you doing today?
Spencer, how are you?
I am doing great. Jim, so for the benefit of our audience, I think you are a past NAIOP president. They know who you are. But for those who don't, just tell them who you are and what you do.
So Spencer, I am the current president of NAIOP. People wouldn't know that because we haven't had any real functions in about 6 or 7 months. And I did spend 16 years at CB, and I've been involved with NAIOP for, I guess, really pretty heavily in the last 15 years or so. I think I originally met you when I hosted you on the panel about 11 years ago, the last time I ran the Capital Stat. And my only other comment would be, the comments that I'll offer to the chapter here is really based on the comments that I get from our executive committee, our board, and then the NAIOP National Forum that I'm on with my dozen industrial peers.
Great. So speaking of industrial, let's get to, this could be the shortest interview of all time. So Jim, you've been in this business a long time. Has time ever been better for industrial? But now though that we know the good news, is there anything that concerns you about industrial?
No, I think we're down to 30 seconds. People are strange are my pop culture reference, by the way. I wanted to get that out. Now, look, industrial I don't think anything is going to slow industrial down because of the barriers to entry. It's very hard to get permits. The people that I talk to around the country are finding this to be the case in most supply constrained markets. And when you have a long lead time to get permits, you're going to choke inventory and the demand is not stopping, right? So the fundamentals are stronger and getting stronger by the day. Every imaginable metric you look at, from rents to sale prices to land prices, land rents. A lot of people are renting land now, land leases, you name it. Entitled land for industrial is going to have a lot of value.
So Jim, most of your portfolio is in the Mid-Atlantic region. What makes this region attractive to you?
A lot of rooftops and limited inventory. So we do see demand. The movement to e-commerce has pushed Amazon into probably taking around 75% of all the space leased here in Maryland. Depending on which national organization you listen to, they're taking 50 to 60% of the space around the country. So Amazon, as long as they stay Amazon as we know them, they're pushing the envelope like you read about, and there doesn't appear to be any end in sight.
Well, speaking of Amazon, today was announced they opened their own online pharmacy, and the stocks of Walgreens and CVS tanked as a result. That may lead to more demand for warehouse space, yet another category for Amazon. But speaking of other categories, we just had Ed Sosha talking about data centers. We talked a little bit about cold storage. Are there any of these other areas attractive to you?
Well, cold storage certainly seems to be in demand. People need to build it. There's a lot of infrastructure and a lot of costs. It's hard to spec it. You don't see many people speccing it, at least that I haven't seen in this market. So, but there's clearly going to be demand for it. And data centers seem to be coming. The legislation that Ed referenced, we're seeing demand. So we do see an uptick there. But again, there's just not much land, for us, again, going back to the people are strange, the politicians need to understand what businesses need, and we need to have smart growth, but we need to have appropriately designated land available. And so same with the cities, the only other comment I'll make on behalf of the chapter is what we're seeing across the board, Spencer, on the office side, is that tenants are paying their rent, and maybe some of the bigger companies are keeping their people at home. All the companies I'm talking to within NAIOP, they believe people need to get back to working together. If you can do it in a socially responsible manner, the synergies, the energy, the productivity far exceeds working at home, at least for our industry and the people I've talked to. So I don't see working from home being a long-term trend for the majority of the people in this country. And I think the people in our chapter agree with that. I think you heard Steve say that from COPT. I know a lot of bigger companies and a lot of people disagree with that, and they're going in a different direction, but got to scratch your head a little bit. And the synergy and the energies when people get together, to me, are just far greater than when you're trying to schedule a Zoom call.
Well, we're going to come back to work from home in just a moment, Jim, but I want to go back to a comment you made about the scarcity of land. And a developer on one of these calls recently said, we have plenty of land, we're just under demolished. And now obviously demolition costs a lot. Then you also bring up, of course, the regulation issues, because most people don't want an industrial site right next to their restaurants. But nevertheless, let's talk about that. What are you looking at now for some of the older retail properties, dead malls, if you want to use that term, for possible industrial use?
We are getting a lot of phone calls, Spencer, from people that own retail buildings who want to repurpose them. But in most cases, their debt or their cost basis still far exceeds the value of the land. Now the land is now, we've seen land go from $100,000 an acre to, Ed mentioned, $1 million an acre, right, for some of the data center land in this region. And so we're seeing industrial land at $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 an acre, right? That's crazy a year or two ago. So, but it's still, if you look at the economics, the value for the land, when you combine the demo and the site work on top of it and the stormwater, you still got to do some stormwater quality, not the same as if it was a greenfield site. But when you run all those numbers, it would have to be a really distressed existing building and land to be able to get the economics to work for a tear down and read. Now, if you can repurpose the building, obviously that's different. And I think that's where you're starting to see opportunity, where can you repurpose this building, particularly in infill areas where smaller buildings might be desirable for e-commerce companies that want to get last mile just in time delivery.
Well, Jim, I think you brought up the key word. It's a four-letter word in our business. It's called rent. Retailers still pay more rent than industrial people. That's before you start talking about co-tenancy clauses and the attractiveness or not of industrial being there. So a lot of folks that talk about the conversionability of dead malls or maybe older office buildings don't understand that it's still not as profitable to have an industrial tenant as it does a office or retail tenant. If you can get one, if you are allowed that use. The only differences we're seeing there are in places like Seattle and Brooklyn, where we've seen some industrial rents in the $35 to $40 range. That would certainly change things. But Jim, you're not seeing those kind of rents around here, are you?
No, Spencer, it's funny. We've gone from $5 rents to $10 rents overnight. We have seen tremendous rent growth, in a lot of submarkets. But again, not to the point where the highest and best use of a retail property would be to tear the building down. I think you're right. The repurposing of the retail building for other uses, whatever they may be, entertainment, recreation, various creative uses, seem to be coming before tearing down the building and building an industrial building. So, again, maybe you can repurpose some of those into industrial, but it's tricky. The ceilings aren't high, the docks aren't there, the column width isn't there. They are not generally very easily convertible into industrial buildings.
Well, Jim, let's switch to the O and NAIOP for a little while here on office. You opened the door on the work from home thing. I just took a look at your portfolio on your website. You own quite a few office buildings. How's it going in those buildings? What does occupancy look like?
Spencer, we have about 400,000 square feet that we lease and manage of office space. And again, all of our tenants are paying rent, every single one of them. And it's hard for us to gauge what percentage of them are occupied. I would say that it's probably in that 50% range of the office we have. I would say maybe a third of it's one story, and clearly the one story flex space has higher occupancies than the mid-rise 4 or 5 story office space. So tenants are paying their rent. We're not seeing distress. We do understand people are not occupying a lot of the spaces. We haven't seen the sublease demand. I guess we're seeing it, we're hearing it, particularly with big companies. And that's where there kind of seems to be a little bit of a divide, with bigger companies feeling like the work from home thing works. And I guess maybe it does. I worked at CB for 16 years. That was a pretty big company. I know you guys are working from home. I've had a small company now for 16 years. We felt like our productivity was down considerably when we were working from home. It wasn't going to cut it for us. We weren't going to be able to compete in the market working from home. So we all came back and everybody seems happy. We have put in some safety measures and try to keep everybody comfortable and happy to be here.
You'll be happy to know I happen to be speaking from my Baltimore CBRE office right now. And the reason why I'm here is because my kids are at home because their school got canceled and they're playing Fortnite and they use all my Wi-Fi. So I couldn't have had this call from home. But let's talk about your office buildings for just another minute or so. I'm going to ask you the difficult question. Are you a buyer right now of suburban office?
We probably are not a buyer of suburban office unless it's one story.
Okay. And when you say one story, do you mean like flex industrial, or you mean like a one story?
I would say either. As long as we feel the functional qualities are there, which is usually enough land to park it or repurpose it. Parking is key, but one story product that's well located, I think, checks a lot of boxes. And again, we haven't seen distress. We haven't seen those opportunities yet. I think we may, if this virus and vaccine rollout and the politics, kind of what I'll call some of the anti-business politics. I saw Cole Schnorp's question. I'm not as optimistic as you on the Senate and the slow rollout of of taxes. I'm worried about it. But we'll see. Look, the Baltimore, Washington market's an incredibly healthy place for all product types, even, clearly multifamily, office, industrial. Retail, I still think is doing okay, although they clearly have some distress, and hotels have some distress. I can't speak to them, but from the IMEO standpoint, I think we still have a pretty healthy climate here.
Okay, well, putting aside some of the things like hand sanitizers and more cleaning, are you planning any major adjustments to your office buildings to improve their wellness over the long term and things like HVAC, touchless technology, or otherwise?
We've been looking at the cleaning component of it, and there has been some interest from some investors who want different standards of a change in HVAC and from different tenants. So, I think our company, at least, I don't know about the industry, maybe you can speak to it, but from our maybe Ian has a comment on it, but from our standpoint, I would say that we're dramatically increasing the cleaning janitorial component, but the other more expensive, longer term investments are still in the kind of analysis standpoint.
Okay.
For us.
Before I continue, I want to give a shout out to my friend and fellow award winner, Karen Cherry, who I just saw her picture on the screen, from the Howard Hughes Corporation, winner of, what was the exact award, Karen? It was the it was the Landlord Agent of the Year? Something like that. Anyway, Karen's awesome. Whatever award she won, we both won one last week for the Daily Record. So rock on, Karen. So Jim, two final questions to you. So I don't want to push you too hard on is there any negative news on industrial, but I will ask, if you are a person looking to build or buy industrial in this region, how much better can it get? What are cap rates going to continue to compress? Are rents going to continue to rise? Is it all just a great place to be?
Well, I will address the negative. The negative is the regulatory side. It's the permitting side, just getting these municipalities to understand the value of land that has all the infrastructure that's on a highway and has the zoning, it's by right, being able to get permits inside of 3 years, is to me the biggest negative to us trying to do what we do. And so as far as, everything else goes, I think we're going to see the consistent, stable cap rates. I don't think we see them going down. Although I heard your 2.8 cap earlier in California, maybe they'll go down a little bit. We don't have much new construction here, and I think rental rates will drive that, projected increase in rental rates. Certainly, we think they're going to be stable. Whether they increase or not, at some point, businesses do start to move further west. We do have available land when you get out to the I-81 corridor and up into different parts of West Virginia, and Maryland and Pennsylvania. So.
Very good. Well, Jim, I'm going to go to the chat room here. I'm going to answer a few questions, but before I do, I'm going to ask you the last question from the chat room for you, Jim. Are the Ravens going to make the playoffs this year?
The Ravens will make the playoffs as a wild card team, and they will go as far as Lamar Jackson takes them with his arm.
All right. Well, very good. Well, on behalf of NAIOP, thanks for being a president of the organization and for this great event today and for a great interview. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Thanks for being here again.
You bet. You bet. So let me go to the chat room now and see some of the additional questions. There's somebody here who was not as optimistic as me on the outcome of the election. And let me go to the exact question about the 50-51 split. You were more optimistic than I am on the impact of Democrats' sweep to Georgia races, giving them a 51-50 majority. Biden has proposed ultra unfriendly tax proposals, higher corporate income taxes, higher income taxes. You concluded that the Democrats would not eliminate the 60-vote filibuster and pass Elements tax plan by 51-50. Okay. By the way, 51-50, I couldn't resist. Was a great Van Halen album. By the way, I think it was the last album. Was David Lee Roth, or did they already have Sammy Hagar as the lead singer? I just don't remember. Somebody remind me of that fact. But 51-50. There are some Democrats in the House that are Republicans in Democratic clothing. And they include the senators from West Virginia. They include some of the senators from other Midwestern states. So yes, you are entirely correct that there is a risk factor that some of the big negatives for our industry, including carried interest tax, income taxes, et cetera, are going to increase under the Biden administration, certainly more so in a 51-50 scenario, but not as much as you think because of these, what one might call Republicans and Democrats clothing in there. And do I think they're going to get rid of the 60-vote filibuster for some of these things? I do. I think that the filibuster is an anachronism of an earlier day. It was already taken away for federal judges. It was already taken away for Supreme Court judges. I think for fiscal matters, they're going to get rid of it too. It's just a matter of time. Now, in terms of the moving forward in the government, the biggest risk factor, and I know we're focused on federal here, right? And this is not my, take a shot at Baltimore moment. This is my time of taking just a reality check for my colleagues on this call who invest not just in Baltimore, but other cities that have fiscal issues. The biggest risk factor to real estate investors from my perspective is local tax increases, number one. And for those folks who invest in multifamily, increases in rent control. Those are two things that can materially and adversely affect your value overnight. Now, I think the good news from an economic perspective is that many of the provisions that would have really nailed our industry did not pass, particularly in California, where Article 15, which would have had a split roll tax, increasing the taxes on commercial real estate, would have increased. But there are other places that are in significant fiscal distress. Chicago obviously always leads that list. If and to the extent the bailout package from Biden isn't big and doesn't provide meaningful dollars to state and local governments, expect a higher property tax bill come next year. So when I talk about politics, I say federal matters, but state matters more. And when I say the federal matters, it doesn't matter as much as you think, because we've been looking at federal elections going back 50 years, and they had no material impact on either GDP growth, jobs growth, or the value or volume of real estate transactions. Now, let me touch on that last point too, because that's a point we didn't dig that hard into, and I think may have been something we should discuss, which is value. Now, I know that Jim Lighthizer is sitting there very comfortable because he owns a bunch of industrial, and it is the catbird seat. It is the place to be. And values have not only been maintained, but there's downward pressure on cap rates in industrial and for the best multifamily. But what's going to happen to the values of other asset types outside of long-term triple net lease office with credit tenants, multi-tenanted office with shorter term WALTs, weighted average lease terms? That is where the battle is being fought right now. And where is that battle being fought? Number one, it's being fought by the appraisers. So one of my good friends is Tom Edwards, who's my global head of appraisal. And we talked about how do you value an office building with a short WALT? And he said, well, number one, we're not changing the cap rates because they need comps for that. But they are dinging these buildings in terms of, number one, their lease up assumptions, how long it's going to take to get the new tenants. And then the net effective rent story is much grimmer than it looks at the moment on the surface, because on the surface, all you see are face rents. You don't see behind the scenes on net effective. So I'll give you one war story. This is not to be negative here, but I'll give you a war story. So one of my good colleagues and friends represents a bunch of law firms and sent in what he thought was a ridiculous offer to a landlord in New York City for his law firm, which included a $10 drop in rent, a huge work letter, and then 2 years free rent. Thought he'd get a nasty gram coming back. 30 minutes later, the landlord called back and said, where do I sign? What he meant is that the weakness in some of these major markets is so strong, you're just not seeing on the surface. Now, it's worse in multifamily than it is in office, but the net effective rent story still has not played out completely in the multi-tenanted office space. Now, am I still bullish on the multi-tenanted office space? You bet I'm bullish on it. Once we get through this storm and the debt capital markets heal, because right now, one of the limiting factors, very hard to get a loan in that space. And once the lenders lend, you'll see people come back in. And to Jim's point on work from home, I think that the good employers are going to bring their employees back to work. And I'll quote my alma mater, Harvard Business Review, which said, great employers focus on productivity. They don't focus on efficiency. And that is the key reason why work from home, eventually people will snap back into the office environment. So before I open it up to final questions, since we only have 9 minutes left, or 10 minutes left, according to my calendar, I want to thank my friend and doppelganger by name, Mark Levy for saying that it was Sammy Hagar was on 5150. It was not David Lee Roth. I guess David Lee Roth's last album was 1984. First of all, after Eddie Van Halen died in the last week, how many people played Van Halen nonstop in their houses? I know I did. See that? Bunch of hands went up. All right. Tim thought I was off my rocker for the 5th time today. So Tim, we got 10 minutes left. Let's just open it up completely to questions.
All right, Spencer, again, if you could put your questions in the chat, we'll get right to them.
There's a hand up or somebody's blocking the camera. Or at this point, if you want to take everybody off mute, that's fine too.
Okay, I can do that.
This way I can call out people by name.
Yeah, I'm allowing everyone to unmute. So if you have a question for Spencer in our last 8 minutes.
So I'll start calling you by name if I don't get a question. Anybody?
I think you might have to put, would you used to call this in person? This was the
Lightning round.
lightning round.
I can call the lightning round. Can I unmute people here?
Has a question for you.
Who's got a question?
Patrick Smith. He says, do you see demand for suburban office increasing because millennials are moving to the county?
I think there's a big difference. It's a good question, Patrick. But I always answer the question the same way. Millennials have been moving to the county for years, right? The trend of millennials all moving into the CBD, that trend ended 2, 3, 4 years ago. But they're going there to live, not necessarily to work. Now, Baltimore is a different city than New York. New York, people are always going to work in the city. And I'll give you the case study of RBS and UBS that tried to move their office buildings to Stamford, Connecticut, which is about a 40-minute ride by train to the Manhattan. That went over like a Led Zeppelin because none of their employees wanted to work there. And so they ended up moving their headquarters back to New York. But I think Baltimore is a very different market. It is a suburban market where there's quite candidly greater strength in many suburban submarkets than in all CBD markets, with the exception of the East Harbor and hopefully one day Port Covington and the like. But the bottom line is that, no, I don't see the suburban trend as being that durable in most cities, though in Baltimore, it might be more durable. Okay, we have a couple other questions here. Do you think the trend of converting retail to multifamily and or mixed use will continue? Absolutely. And it goes right back to the answer I gave on the question before, which is live, work, play. Live, work, play is the future. We really don't segregate our markets now into just urban and suburban. We have urban, suburban, and then we have this thing called urban suburban, which is sort of halfway in between the two. And that's a market like Columbia near the mall, which they have a mall where they built multifamily, which they built office buildings next to it so they can create virtual live, work, play. They're doing something very similar up here in Hunt Valley. There's a lot of jobs I can point to that have this. The best job I can point to is a job not in this market in San Diego, where CBRE, we moved our headquarters in Carlsbad from a suburban office building to the 2nd floor of an old Westfield mall. And for those people who know the outdoor mall business, being on the 2nd floor is not exactly Schaefer City. It's not a great place to be. But our space there is nice that I almost moved my kid's bar mitzvah from my country club here to San Diego because the space was that sweet. So yes, I do see that trend continue, but I think you have to go back to the same debate that Jim and I had before, which is the R word, rent. Can you get the most efficiency out of your space by a certain use, whether it be retail, multifamily, office, or otherwise? And also, and this is the $1 million question, it's a lot more expensive and a lot more time consuming to change a use than it sounds in the cover of a white paper. It's still very costly to do that change. But what I do see happening is because the internet is it's not going anywhere. I do see some of those regulations on where industrial can be located loosening somewhat. But I don't see it loosening to the point you're going to see small distribution centers in strip centers. I think what you're going to see are four-wall buildings that have the capability to have retail and industrial and service. Best retailer I can point to would be Best Buy, who is the poster child for how to do it right. They are a four-waller. but they also have all three of these services. Now, on my podcast the other day, I had Joey Agree, who's the CEO of Agree Realty. He thinks that the future of retail is in this four-wall that has this hybrid use of services, distribution, and retail. But I think that the person's question, once you're dealing with larger properties, you have to include the multifamily and office component as well. Let's see. Another question from Owen Rouse. Owen, where are you, Owen? Owen's my good buddy. I think Owen's the first guy who brought me in here. So, Owen, how soon will we see two-story warehouse built from the ground up? Well, Owen, this is another complicated answer for you. It's that same four-letter word, rent. Once you can prove you can get the rents to support the additional cost of multi-story industrial, you will begin to see multi-story industrial. Right now, the case is still not black and white. Now, it's made in Seattle, it was made in Brooklyn, but to put it in a location where the price of land is low, no. Now, to Jim's point earlier, as the price of land continues to creep up, you're going to see more of it. But right now, the rents don't support it because it's a lot more expensive to build a multi-story industrial, particularly when you're dealing with the large trucks and you've got to deal with turnaround areas and things like that. So I don't think you're going to see it in bulk anytime soon, except in these super high density locations. All right. What other factors are you looking at when predicting trends for Gen Z and the future of their space needs? Well, let me just say the following before I talk about our friends, the Gen Zers. It wasn't us that coined the term young whippersnappers. It was our parents. And you know who was before them? It was their parents. So every generation that is 25 and below are the young whippersnappers of today. But that's my one knock on Gen Zers. But now let me give them some love. I'm going to give Gen Zers some love. You ready for all my Gen Z friends on this call? The ICSC did a poll a year ago and asked Gen Zers why they buy goods in malls. By the way, Gen Zers are the #1 age cohort for buying goods in malls. You know why they buy goods in malls? A lot of people will say, oh, because it's green goods, because it's locally made, because it's high tech. You know what was #1? Cost, value. You know who's motivated by cost value? Everybody. They ain't that different than everybody else. And I'll give you one other story about that. So by show of hands here on this call, and I'm looking out my window right now at the Port of Baltimore, who here wants to get back on a cruise ship? Just a question. Am I the only hand? Way gets a hand up there. Well, no, I see Patricia saying no, and Carl is like, what are you, nuts? That's the second time he did that to me today. No. You know who's getting back on a cruise ship? You are. You know why? Because cruises are awesome. And you know what's more awesome than a cruise? A cheap cruise. So I went onto the Carnival Cruise Line website the other day, and I saw, well, what does it cost to get on a cruise ship? And I found out to get on a cruise ship to go from Fort Lauderdale to the Bahamas when these cruises still open for 3 days. Anybody want to guess what that costs for a 3-day cruise from Fort Lauderdale to the Bahamas? Owen Rouse is saying $300. Anybody else? 125. David Fields has been to too many of my presentations. It's $129 per person. People will fill that cruise ship for $129. Aloha. I'm on it. So with that, we've got 2 minutes left here. Tim, why don't you say the final words?
All right. Thank you, Spencer. And a sincere thanks to you and your entire team for putting this presentation together. When we told you it was 2 hours, you looked at us like we were crazy, but you filled it with great, rich content, and we couldn't thank you enough. And there was one last question that was answered that Joe Nolan wanted you to rank some bands. Michelle was wrong. Salvina was wrong by saying Rolling Stones were the best of that lot. It's always going to be Led Zeppelin to me.
Led Zeppelin is the best band of all time.
Absolutely.
There is no #2.
Thank you, Spencer. So that's why I know you are the person we should be listening to.
Mm-hmm.
Thank everybody for joining us this morning. It is membership renewal season, so please renew your membership with NAIOP Maryland. Hopefully we get through this pandemic and we're back to in-person events on a regular frequency, because we know your main goal is to connect with each other. But in the meantime, we'll look to bring great content like this continually to you as members of NAIOP Maryland. Again, Spencer, to you and your entire team, thank you for the great content you provided today and always being supportive of our organization. Everyone, enjoy your morning.
Thank you to my team. Thank you to my friends in Baltimore, Maryland, and rock on and go Ravens.